So what I think I've learned, and this was by trial and error, was you need a process, like see a lot of opportunities and then whittle that down over time. And you can do that. Like in the world of human-centered design, this is called like diverge and converge.
This is Henry Washington, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavaggioni, and today's guest is another Mike, and it's Mike Gardon. So Mike, super excited to have you on the show with me today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I feel like we got Mike and Mike on ESPN going here.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah. Hey, so I want to start things off the same way I start every podcast episode, and we want to know more about you. So could you share a little bit about yourself, share your story? Who is Mike Gardon?
Yeah, I started my career as a futures and derivatives trader in Chicago, really learning the ropes of investing. Minute to minute, I actually would say that it's more akin to gambling than investing in that kind of time frame. But I started there and eventually moved my way over into the world through a few different startups and some success and some failure into the world of content marketing and internet marketing. And I was fortunate enough to help build a company out in Seattle called reviews.com. We sold that company to a private equity firm in 2016. I spent a little bit of time doing some consulting for a Fortune 500 insurance company in the area of innovation and new product development, and then eventually transitioned back into the world of internet and content marketing for myself. So now I am the CEO of a company called Rejoin Media, which is basically a small holding company. You could think of it as a very small private equity company where we go and invest in digital businesses, websites, and e-commerce companies and hold them as a portfolio. And this is really a lifestyle business. It's not a massive growth business, and that's really on purpose. I designed the business to fit with my lifestyle and what I want holistically out of life rather than the rat race of grow. And so it affords me the opportunity to pick and choose what I focus on. And luckily enough, I found a calling with one of our portfolio companies, and that is Careercloud.com, where I'm also host a podcast, I write a newsletter, and I generally talk and help people through becoming more intentional with their career. So that may be managing through a career change or just getting more control and intention over the time we spend trying to earn a living and make $1 and trying to get more balance and fulfillment out of it.
Wow, Mike, what a background. You've run the gamut in kind of a bunch of different directions to go from being a derivatives trader and then moving on to that to building businesses, right? You built the reviews.com and then sold it. That's pretty amazing. You don't hear too much about that, like going from doing trading to that. But then after that, you got into internet and media marketing, and which is something I'm trying to get better at myself when it comes to marketing myself and marketing like what I'm doing. I guess I got pretty good at doing it with the podcast because the podcast has done well, but like everything else is but that's fantastic. And then after that, you did some consulting, right?
Yeah.
So what made you go from doing consulting? Because I know you were probably getting paid quite well when you were consulting to get back into this marketing game.
Yeah. So I think the only real tie through my career, and I guess the only thing that I really consider myself good at, is figuring out change and how to change and adapt. I think that's the thread through everything. I'm a guy that, while I haven't had a calling, I haven't said like, I am a doctor or I am going to be in product marketing or whatever. Alignment in what I do matters. And I had a really hard time like figuring out and articulating that. But in between the reviews.com startup, which was go raise money, flying, traveling, to the consulting. I took the consulting gig, which was in my hometown, as a way to pause and settle down. And this is when I was building a family. I had 2 young kids at the time, adding a third at that time. And I took it as a job and I said, I don't think I'm probably a great big corporate type person, but there's a lot here that I can learn to get better at. And I went in and I said, I'm going to give myself 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, I'm either going to run one of these spin out companies or I'm going to start my own thing. And just as I progressed in that role, the bureaucracy and the hand tying, and there was a feeling that this just isn't right. And so I set about a journey, and I had runway and I had a job and all this stuff, but I set about on a journey that said, how can I design my ideal work life that gets me fulfillment and lets me have my creativity? Money is not really a huge thing. It's more about owning my work product and being able to facilitate my family. My wife is a doctor. Her job comes first in our household, as it should be. She really helps. She helps people and all that kind of thing. So I set about basically creating a side hustle to say, hey, let's get a second income stream going. And I went back to what I knew at the time, right? And I had some experience in content marketing and search engine optimization. So I just went back there as a constraint. It's like, why start from scratch doing something else when I know something? And it's a principle going forward for change. And I just said, what would this look like to build this up to a point where I could walk away from my consulting job? And fortunately enough, I took the steps and I took the time. It took 1.5 years to build it to a point where I was in a position where any little thing could just cause me to say, I'm out of here. And the moment in time was I had a boss that brought me in, great guy, but he was like, we pay you a lot of money and you have to put up with some of this bureaucracy. You have to fight some of these fights. And I am just not that way. And that was the golden handcuffs moment where I really realized like, that's not a good enough reason to be here. And so I left, got the company to a point where I could get that off ramp and not really put my family at risk or have any clawbacks, downsizing of our lifestyle or anything like that. And I haven't looked back. That was the end of 2018. And I am happy and I'm content in the creativity and the fulfillment that I get out of work.
Yeah. Wow. Mike, that was a loaded to that question.
Sorry.
No, I really appreciate it because I'm sitting here taking some notes as you're going. There's so much to take away from that. But I would say probably the biggest thing is I feel like you realize that you needed to get that personal fulfillment that you wanted, but also you wanted to be able to be around your family a little bit more and not as stressed out. Because I feel like you having to go fight some of those fights that was described, the bureaucracy of that, sometimes it's just tedious work and it puts like a mental fatigue on you. I know like I dealt with this throughout my career in the Navy. And it's one of the reasons why I retired at 20 years instead of staying longer is just like, I felt I'm just tired, right? I want to be able to do my own thing, spend more time with my family and all of that. And that's why I decided to go full time as an entrepreneur. And that's why I was really interested in having this conversation with you today, because there's a term that you use called being a dadpreneur. And it's funny because I have a friend of mine from way back when, back in New York, that her moniker online is like the messy mompreneur. Right. So I think it's funny now to see dadpreneur being used as well. And it made me think as I was reading through your bio and everything, I'm just like, maybe that's what I need to focus on more, is just being like the dad who's an entrepreneur and have that first. But anyway, I'll get away from all that. You had mentioned a couple other things, like part of that bureaucracy that you were dealing with is you felt like you had those golden handcuffs, right? It paid well. And it was like, have to fight this quote unquote good fight. And the money's going to keep rolling in. That's that golden handcuff. And it looks like you found the keys because you took them off and you moved back on, right, to do something that you enjoyed doing, which was the content marketing and SEO. I don't think people realize how important that is, especially SEO, the search engine optimization, because that's one of those things that can actually help take your business to the next level. It makes you easier to find. If your website is modeled properly, and you have the right keywords in the right places, it can go a lot further. I just started up a new business and I focused more on SEO and everything else that I was doing. And this new business that I launched this week is getting more website hits than Average Joe Finances and other websites that I've created that I've had for years. And I'm like, okay. So it does make a very big difference. So obviously what you're doing is something that's going to be very useful and helpful to other people as well, but also for yourself. And it's something that you enjoy doing. If you're not getting fulfillment out of what you do, then why are you doing it? Right? Because that carries with you. Like you bring that home, right? You want to do that. So now you do Career Cloud, a radio podcast, right? For Career Cloud,
Yeah.
careercloud.com. You're the host of that podcast, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So tell me what you like about being a podcast host.
It's really who you meet and rub shoulders with. Again, we acquired the site in 2017 or something like that. And the gentleman I bought the site from had a podcast going, and it was really focused on job search tips, interview tips, resume tips. It's really important stuff, but it doesn't get me jazzed up. And so my first step was to get the site from an advertising and traffic standpoint set up and making money. And once that, I had my eyes on taking over that podcast. And so I think it was really last May, maybe, I took it over and I just wanted to start having conversations and I would figure out the direction I want to take it. And now I'm having conversations with people who have done some really interesting things to change their careers. That's what gets me jazzed, is like I want it to be an inspiration to listeners to say, yeah, I can do that too. And it doesn't mean you're going to start a business or quit your job and move to Hawaii, right? Like you're out in Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean, what are the things that I need to do to get more control in my day-to-day job so it's not so stressful, so I have time to be there for my family or to be there for whatever else gives me fulfillment, or it's getting fulfillment out of volunteering or creating a side hustle, just a project, right? That jazzes you up and gives you energy. So that's what it's about for me, is in having those conversations, meeting people, making connections, and inspiring our listeners.
I absolutely love that, Mike, because it's one of the things that I feel like as a podcast host as well, one of the selfish things we get to do, right, is when we get to have these conversations, one, you get to ask the questions that you want to ask. Two, you get to talk to some people that have some really amazing stories. Like your story's amazing, right? And sitting here, I get to have a conversation with you about what you've built and how you built it. Not only do I get to learn and benefit from that, but my listeners also get to learn and benefit from that and say, you know what, maybe this is something I might be interested in. I've been listening to this podcast for a while, and there's been a lot of stuff about real estate. There's been a lot of stuff about investing all over different spots, but maybe this might be something that I might be interested in. So it's nice that you get that kind of flexibility. And then I like that you changed it up to make it more of a conversation, because that's what I like to do here too. I like to have a conversation, like the two of us are just sitting down having a cup of coffee. I know it's a little bit later where you're at, but where I'm at, I'm still drinking coffee. I know you saw me sipping this whole time, actually out of my giant mug, because I like a lot of coffee. 20 years in the Navy will do that to you, right? But yeah, just being able to sit here and have this conversation with you, man, is just fantastic. And I just want to say I really commend you for everything that you've done. And I feel like the biggest thing that I'm taking away from this is have fulfillment in whatever it is that you want to do. If it doesn't bring you joy, what is it bringing? Stress, pain? Like, why do you want that in your life? I've said this a couple times on this show, that no matter what you're doing for your 9 to 5, or if it's a side hustle that you've turned into your main hustle, if you really enjoy what you're doing, can you really consider that work? So it's really try to get yourself into something that you enjoy doing, which I feel like you've unlocked that door and kind of busted right through it. Now, I would say though, that one of the things I want to ask you is, because like a lot of times, like when you're trying to figure that out and you start looking at all these different options that you can go into and figure out what you want to do, that's a lot of stuff. And I feel you could just completely get overloaded with information. So how do you deal with something like that, where you're just loaded and you're trying to figure out what path you want to take your journey on next?
Yeah, it's difficult. And unfortunately, I think it's one of the main problems with essentially everyone. When you come out in the work, you go to college or you don't go to college, you come out in the workforce, and if you go through college, there's never any discovery or apprenticeship. These are the things that I could potentially do with my life, or there's no process around aligning what your natural skills and abilities are with what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's get out there and then figure it out. And so what I think I've learned, and this was by trial and error, was you need a process, like see a lot of opportunities and then whittle that down over time. And You can do that. Like in the world of human-centered design, this is called like diverge and converge. And I remember having this conversation when I was in college with my dad. I'm like, I don't know, but I know I'm going to do a lot of different things and I'm going to find success. And so there's this kind of principle like in investing, right? Like when you're thinking about the greatest investors in the world, like they're always talking about their stock portfolio, right? And the idea is they don't bet on one stock usually. They have a number of them in a basket because there is uncertainty. They do not know the future. They're the smartest people in the world, right? But they do not know the future. And so you have to have a process for setting yourself up with a number of options. As we progress, like the more uncertainty we have, the more options we need. And as we progress to certainty, we need less options and we need to then start betting bigger and heavier on that pathway. So I think one of the things that you can do, like when you're young and starting out, and you can do this when you're older as well, but it's easier when you're younger, is try to figure out like a way to see 3 to 5 different job types or career possibilities. And you can take this to skill development too. It's like you can build skills in any place that you possibly want, but you can't build them all. And so you have to make a decision. And I find that 3 to 5 is the magic number, 3 probably being closer to the number of different avenues that you can pursue and investigate. So just an example from my career changes, I built a startup kind of in between that I didn't really talk about that eventually failed. And I was coming out, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm about to move. We're having a kid. I like this idea of startups. I'm a good jack of all trades. I'm a good learner. I can figure things out, but I need to figure out like how to get in touch with some startups. And then my idea is I'll eventually full-time join the one that is most aligned with me and has the best kind of path forward. And so I just created a freelance consulting company and hung up my shingle. Hey, Mike Gardon is now a startup consultant helping with like capital raising and whatever else a growth company would need. And my goal was get 3. I somehow within 30 days got 3 clients, was making as much as I was in my startup that failed from a salary standpoint. And I eventually joined full-time the one that was going really well and that I had an aptitude for, which was reviews.com. So I think you can use that mind to think about where to focus. And then I think the other piece of this that's hard, but it's really important, is to use constraints. And the constraints that you need to use are your sources of advantage. So I'm working on this map, the advantage map, where I'm talking to clients about where all, like, I basically think there's like 8 sources of advantage and knowing them really well for you. So it's like personality, things that give you energy, obviously what you like, but also how you take action, your judgment, all of these things. And I'm mapping how you can get feedback on all of those. And then using those constraints to play a game, right? Find a pathway, take a job that you're going to be set up to excel in. Because when you excel in something, you like it more, you're going to pour more energy into it and be better. So the option overload thing, like a lot of times to solve that, it's place constraints. Think about where you're set up uniquely with an advantage, and don't play games where you're at a disadvantage.
Okay, yeah, I absolutely love that. Like when you first started this off, you were talking about, and you see like some really great investors when they're talking about their portfolios, right? They have this huge diversification, right? They don't put all their eggs in one basket. And you're saying like when you're younger, you do the same thing with your career choice, right? Have these different options, find the one that's going to give you the most joy, your best return on life. I guess you could call that ROL, return on life,
Yeah.
and then go down that road. But when you're younger, I like how you're describing this, because especially for a young college student or somebody that's going out of high school into the workforce, figuring out this while you're young, because you have a lot more room to make mistakes, if you get into some financial issues, you've got more room to recover from that than when you're older and trying to figure out when you're going to retire, right? So I think that's one of the key things here. If you're already like halfway through your career, it's probably not to try to change unless you can find something that's going to paying you what you're making or better, but find the thing that's going to give you that ROL.
Yeah, I just want to cut in real quick and just add,
sure.
It's the idea of like advantage mapping like where you have an advantage is very distinct from find your passion, right? I might be really passionate about basketball and I'm just not equipped to have an advantage play in the NBA. So there's more to it than that. And there's also a feedback loop where it might not be your passion, But if you have a natural aptitude for it and you find other activities that go into that give you energy rather than suck energy, and you can find like some early success and you like the topic area or whatever, like you can build a really good, fulfilling career doing that. And it's not yoga or basketball or whatever. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I appreciate that. So when you're talking about this map, this advantage map, right? Is this a more of, I guess it's kind of like a pathfinding. It's going to help you like find that right path for you to actually travel forward. And like you said, it doesn't have to be something that you're necessarily 100% passionate about, but it's got to be something that you're good at, right? It's got to be something that you can tolerate and it's not going to stress you out to death. And a lot of times I feel like some people, they're able to do that. They're able to find that. I try to tell myself, I don't want to just settle on something. I want to make sure I'm doing something that I do enjoy. It doesn't have to be like the thing that I'm 100% passionate about, but I want to make sure I'm getting some type of fulfillment, like you said, out of it as we go forward. Now, the other thing while you're doing that, especially if you're doing something you don't enjoy, that's why I always talk about, hey, figure out what you want to do on the side or invest and everything else. That's why I love side hustles. While I was in the Navy, I started doing some side hustles that have now become my main hustle since retiring and getting out of the Navy. Do you have any recommendations for somebody that would, let's say they're in a career field that they don't exactly enjoy, but they want to maybe take your map that you're talking about and use that on their side hustle to figure out what they want to do when they're ready to move on from that particular career field?
Yeah. So like the idea of the map is foundational for anyone to think broadly and creatively about where they can use their unique skills, abilities, and other sources of advantage, right? So if you go through the process, people come away with, oh, I didn't think about that. And the idea is then you cross mingle them, right? And I think if you're in your job and it's not super fulfilling and you want to explore, right? It's a useful exercise to think then like, how can you, the next question is, okay, this specific advantage, like how can you then bridge that advantage to find more fulfillment or make an income stream or whatever? Like the easiest way to do that, the easiest way for most people is you have one of the sources of advantage is just what are you good at and what expertise do you have today? And like everybody in a job has some type of expertise. And the easiest way to have more control and tiptoe into entrepreneurship is to literally be a freelancer. Find one other company or person that's going to pay you for exactly what you do already, and you're a freelancer. That is basically the smallest possible, least scary thing that you could do. So that's one avenue. The other is there's so many that you can't even think about all of them, but listen to what people say about you, right? For the longest time, people told me, Mike, you're pretty good like public speaker. And I'm an introvert. And I was like, whatever. And I never felt it and listened to it like in here. I was always thinking up here, but now I'm a podcaster. I have public conversations and I'm figuring out how to monetize that through advertising and all this kind of stuff. So it's this idea of just leaning into and getting like just that beginner's mind of, I don't have to be an expert here, but this is a learning experience, right? Using your side hustle as a learning experience to say the worst thing that can happen is that you use a side hustle, it doesn't work, but you learn. Like that is the worst thing that's going to happen. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to bankrupt you. So get started, figure out what you want to learn, what you want to explore. And as you do that, you just start thinking, you'll figure out how to monetize it. If it's really aligned with your advantages and you start to be good at whatever that is, you're going to figure out how to monetize it. We live in an age where any individual can be a solopreneur and create and market and build an income stream by themselves off of what they already know or what they're currently learning. So it's about starting, following your interest, your curiosity, and using your advantages to get there.
Yeah, Mike, I love that. And you know what? I would say that I would not have guessed that you are an introvert at all.
I am.
You're quite well at this. I am very much an extrovert. I'm the guy that if you go to networking events, I'm like the social butterfly that has to talk to everybody before I leave. So yeah, that's fantastic advice. I've seen so many people, especially over the course of the pandemic, right? Freelancing has become such a big thing. And you've seen like this, the great resignation is what they call it, right? Where people are leaving their 9 to 5s to go out and freelance and do the same thing that they were doing in their job, but they're doing it on their own now. And they are their own boss. And feel like there's that self gratification you get when you're the one creating your own schedule. You're the one creating like what you're doing work wise. And I agree with you that there are many people can go out there and become a solopreneur and create income streams and even get it to the place where it's going to replace their current. Now, they're like how you described that you can make mistakes with your side hustles, and it's not going to be the end of you, but it's a learning experience. And I like that because I talk about that a lot with other real estate investors too. Like when you get into a bad deal or something like that, or things didn't work out the way you thought they were going to work out, you don't just tuck your tail and run. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a real estate investor, right? You take that and you learn from it. It's a learning experience. And we call that getting a master's degree in whatever that is, right? So you got a good education in whatever it was that you failed in. So we don't really call it failure. We call it education. So I really like that you tied that into this as well with a side hustle, because that is 100% true. If you get into something and it's not working out, you're learning from that experience. What matters is that you don't go and try to do the same thing again, because you should have learned that it's not going to work. So I think that's really important. Okay. So a couple other things that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to not only doing like a side hustle or anything else, but let's say you're in your own career field and you enjoy what you do and you want to try to focus on boosting that up. Like, how do you invest in yourself to get better at your craft and get better at what it is that you do that you enjoy, or what you do that brings you the best return because it's your career field and that's what you do?
Yeah. So first off, let's throw it out there. Career and personal finance are inextricably linked, right? And when we really get down to brass tacks, people ask, what's your biggest asset? And people talk about their homes and their real estate portfolio or something like that. For most people, their biggest asset is themselves and their ability to earn a dollar. And if all the dollars that you're going to earn in your lifetime and bring it back to the present and do a DCF cash flow analysis, it's like a $2 million asset for most people. So that is where most people should start investing, actually, I believe, because you have a $2 million asset, and the way that compound interest works is the bigger your asset that you're compounding, the more you're actually adding and making. So the idea of like paying $2,000 for some type of course, right, that's going to net you another $20,000, $30,000 per year in income is a slam dunk when you think about return on that. It's a similar process, knowing who you are and what you're good at. So Warren Buffett talks about circle of competence and knowing what you know and forgetting what you don't know. And the idea is that you know a lot less than the entirety of the world, right? So stay in that circle of competence. So using the advantage map or something like it, where you're talking about your personality and you're taking different assessments and doing the work to figure out where your kind of highest point of leverage is within your career and the thing that you're really known for. And then it's deciding, so once you figure that out, then it's deciding what are the skills that are tangential to that, maybe just outside the circle of competence, but that are additive and not subtractive. So like an example that I give, so many people, I guess a couple of years ago and still today, it was always like, anybody can learn to code. You just have to be curious. And I thought that, and I messed around with a couple of like coding boot camps once in a while. And I came to the conclusion, I'm like, that is not something that's anywhere close to leveraging my particular circle of competence. Like I'm always going to be in a position where I need an actual expert in that to do something for me rather than me doing it. So for some people, trying to figure out what they're good at or what they like when they're young, that's a good pathway, but it's a very bad pathway to do that. And so the filter of where to invest your time and energy into skill building comes from still that foundational base of knowing your advantages, knowing your circle of competence, finding your what I call your highest point of leverage, and then looking out at the skill landscape, picking, because now you're in control, right? You have a plan of how to ladder that up. And you can now look into the future and see, if I add X, Y, and Z, I can get to this particular area that I want to get to with my career.
Wow, Mike, that's some really good stuff, because I feel like a lot of us get lost in we want to focus on how to build our income. We want to focus on what can we do on the side to make things better? What can we do to make ourselves better at work? But we don't focus on the actual, how do I make myself better at what I'm doing? And I feel like that's one of those things where you can really focus on yourself, focus on and making yourself better at what you do. And I'm going back to that F word that you said earlier, fulfillment, right? What's going to give you the most fulfillment out of that? And I feel like it's more of and this happens a lot on these episodes, like with most people that I talk to, I feel like it's your mindset, right? I feel like to have that free thinking mindset, you need to have a curious mindset, right? And then you have to be willing to do what it takes to actually move forward and do that. Yeah, I feel like once you change your mindset and once you figure it out the rest starts to get a lot easier. So man, that is fantastic. I want to transition this into something now that I call the final round. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on this show. And it's going to help our listeners understand how you, Mike, how you are when you're put in a tough position, or when with any situation that you've dealt with that may have been like a difficult choice to make. This helps give us a little bit more clarity into who you are. So if you're ready to go, we'll get this party started.
Sounds good.
All right, Mike. So the first question right off the bat is a doozy. And that's, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in business?
Yeah, I didn't quite know where this conversation was going to go. We talked a lot about finding opportunities and creating opportunities. I guess I call it seeing at bats. And that's actually, I feel like my biggest mistake is early on in college and very early on in my career. Like, I didn't have a process to go see the world and experience the things that I could possibly do to find fulfillment with my career. And as I think most people don't have that calling right away, and they don't know what they really want to do. And so I think that's my biggest mistake. If I could have done that a lot sooner, I could have got ahead and grown a lot faster than I actually did.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Now, can you describe to me, what do you mean by these at bats? Are these like the different opportunities that you could have put in front of yourself?
Yeah. So again, I think about this diverge, converge, right? And the infinite number of possibilities that we could potentially do with our lives to make it, earn a living and find fulfillment. And an at bat is just each one of those options, right? Like, I just didn't have a thought process of how I would operationalize that, how I would go out and see all of these different things, how I could have gone out and found people that are working in all of these different industries, and I could have shadowed them, and there's a lot of things I could have done. Right now, looking back, I just didn't get enough at bats early on. And I think, again, going back to one of the first things I said in the episode, I think higher education is failing people in this, because I think the faster we can all get aligned with what brings us fulfillment and what we're good at and what we have natural advantage in, the higher productivity we're going to have overall, and higher work satisfaction.
100%. 100%. I love that. Okay. The next question, Mike, ties into that last one that that last answer you just gave. But what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started?
Figuring all this out, figuring out what you want to do with your career, is a lot more emotion-based and heart-led than I thought. I still am very analytical and very logical. And I've had to really work hard at listening to my body on certain things. And like, there are oftentimes, it's actually become one of my investment criteria for different things is, do I feel like this just has to happen? That's an actual investment criteria, because it's a heart-led thing. If I come across something where it just feels like it needs to happen and we need to give this a shot, no matter what the outcome, I'm going to do something like that. You have to listen to both. You have to listen to what your body's telling you to get out of situations and to go towards certain paths. And then you have to use your analytical mind to set up a process and a plan to make that kind of become a reality.
Yeah. Wow. That's, I love that, because we didn't really talk about that too much. It is very important to understand how much your emotions play into those decisions that you make, especially from very early on. This even goes back to what you were talking about with having those at bats, right? It's that emotional touch that goes along with it as well that really affects your decision making. And talk about this a lot on this podcast too, with the emotion that's tied to purchases and investments. There's always emotion that's tied to that, right? And you might say, oh no, it's whatever, it's just an investment property, I'm not emotionally tied to it. When you sign that check, I guarantee you there's something triggered inside of you that's affecting your emotions. No, I appreciate that perspective for sure. All right, Mike. So the next question, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today? So let's say that young college kid or that young student that just graduated high school and now wants to go into a trade. What would you recommend to someone like that?
I think it's mostly don't overthink it. Just start. So find your opportunity, right? Like we talked about before, and then go take action and get feedback and knock them off and cross them off the list. Don't think about all of them at the same time. You learn a lot faster through action than overthinking and analysis. And so that's partly the heart-led, the emotion piece. Just go do it. It's messy. But I think the more action you take and the better you get at taking action, the faster you're going to learn and the more you're going to progress.
Again, another fantastic answer. I love that. Taking action, that is huge. Okay, the final question of the final round. This kind of doesn't tie into all the other ones. This is more of an opinion, but I know you probably have some great recommendations. Mike, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related podcast or book, or both? I did that backwards. I usually say book or podcast, but yeah, what kind of books or podcasts do you like?
God, there's so many good books. So for podcast, I listen to The Investors Podcast. It's hosted by a guy named Preston Pish. Actually, there's a few different hosts, but The Investors Podcast, they do a lot of study of billionaires. They have really great guests on. They do talk about some crypto and Bitcoin and stuff also. But I feel like what they're doing is tapping into the biggest and best investment minds in the field. And we can all learn something from studying those types of people. After I drop my kids off, that's usually what I'm listening to. And I got a lot of books behind me, like Ray Dalio's Principles is a book that I think is really interesting from the standpoint of like aligning and operating your life in a way from a set of principles so it doesn't feel so haphazard. And the book that's probably had the most impact on me is actually called The Art of Learning by Josh Watskin. And I have some things on my podcast and our YouTube channel about the impact that's had on me, but came at a really critical point in my life. And so that one's always got a special place in my heart.
All right. Yeah. Fantastic. Great recommendations. Great podcast recommendation. Great book recommendations. I've heard Principles recommended on here before, but yeah. So The Art of Learning, that's another good one that I'm gonna have to go check out now. Add that to the list. Awesome. All right, Mike, that is it for the final round. You survived. So thank you so much. Hey, I do have one more question for you though. And this is the most important question of all, because people were listening to this interview and they're like, man, I really like what Mike is saying. And I don't know which Mike they're talking about. It might be you, it might be me, but it's probably you. But they're like, we really like what he's talking about. We want to learn more about him, what he's doing. We want to maybe go check out his podcast as well. Where can people find that information about you? Do you have a website, social media, anything you could share with us today?
Sure. So there's a few different places, but my last name is spelled Gardon. And you can subscribe to my newsletter at michaelgardon.com. You can check out everything we offer at Careercloud at careercloud.com, including the podcast. There's links there. And then personally, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn and a little bit on Twitter. My Twitter handle is MN Gardon, MNGARDON, and you can find me on LinkedIn by just searching my name. My DMs are open. I think anyone can message me on LinkedIn. So if there's anything that anybody heard or has questions on, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask.
Fantastic. So I will make sure I have all those links in the show notes to make it easier for everybody. So, hey guys, you could just go click away, copy and paste. Just don't do it while you're driving. Mike, this has been fantastic, man. I feel like I learned so much just from this short conversation that we had. I've got a whole page of notes here. I got a lot of stuff to think about after we end this call, but this was really refreshing and a good change of pace from what we normally talk about, but it's good to get these different perspectives. So thank you so much for taking the time today to have this conversation with me.
You bet. Thanks for having me. This has been great. Great to meet you. And I'm excited to follow your progress and everything that you're doing as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And hey, to my listeners, thank you so much for joining me and our special guest, Mike Gardon, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Mike. Aloha from Hawaii, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.